Good evening, everybody. I see some of y'all joining us. We'll get started here in just a few minutes after we give y'all a few minutes to get settled. See a few of our Morganton faculty members here on the call. Good evening, Mr. Stutzman, Mr. Stewart. Hello, Mr. Stewart's class, data science. We have one section of our data science course in the evening. He brought the whole class, I understand, today. So we'll give him a big shout out for being here. Of course, I said that and then he dropped off the call, so I must have scared him all away. I don't know what happened. All right, we'll give everybody just another few minutes to get going here. As people are coming in, we'll use this time to kind of do a couple of general reminders here in case this is your first time coming to a data science panel this year at Science and Math. First up, I'll introduce myself to everybody so you know who I am. I'm Mr. Gibson, Taylor Gibson. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for being here this evening. I am the Dean of Data Science at the North Carolina School of Science and Math. And so my background, in case you're not familiar, I love teaching math. I started my life with my career as a math teacher, but I've also done some stuff in computer science and engineering. And I've really enjoyed moving into this data science space because it allows me to combine all of those passions and skills together into a really fun and new way. So if you ever need to get a hold of me, there's my email address on the slide. Next up, a reminder that we've got one more of these panels left to go this year. So, and that one is in April 19th on sports analytics. So we're putting together a great panel for that session as well. So if you haven't signed up already, you can go to our data science program website, just at datascience.ncssm.edu. And there is a link to register there. So you can go ahead and do that same way that y'all registered for this one. We do have one of our online students who's taken some data science coursework. She has started a data science podcast where she goes out and interviews folks both in industry and in colleges and universities about their experiences in data science. You can find the link there to the podcast also on our data science program website. Another reminder that we do have a data science expo coming up this May on our Durham campus. That is sponsored and run by Anaconda. So if you know data science, you've probably heard the word Anaconda before. They're an organization that helps organize the open source community around Conda, which is a great package management tool, but they've really built out a lot of other infrastructure as well. You can go to anaconda.com/data-science-expo and check that out there. Your registration is actually still open. So if you're interested in participating, it is not too late. We'd love to have you join us on Saturday, May the 13th. And lastly, we want to give a shout out to the Institute for Advanced Analytics at NC State. All of our panelists tonight are graduates of this program. It's been around for 15 years, I believe. I saw on their website. And so it's been one of the first master degree programs in kind of data science, data analytics in the country, and has an amazing track record of producing outstanding graduates. They all get jobs like right away. They're highly in demand. So we should feel very lucky. We have 3 of them with us here this evening for this panel because they're all very accomplished and very successful and very awesome folks. So I'm excited to be able to introduce them all to you in just a moment. As a reminder, for the evening, we're going to do our introductions here for a minute, hear a little bit about how data science gets used in the healthcare industry. And we'll have time for Q&A for you all here at the end. So I've got some questions ready to go for our panelists. But as they're sharing their experiences and how they're using data science in their careers right now, don't forget you can click that Q&A button in the Zoom and you can add your questions and answers, or we'll add some answers, but you add your questions to the queue. We'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the evening. And you don't need to wait to the Q&A section to start adding your questions. So we'll keep an eye on, and when we get to the Q&A section, we'll start going through those. So hopefully you'll hear something that resonates with you from one of our panelists, and you'll be inspired to start asking some questions. All right, without further ado, we'll go ahead and start with our introductions. So I am going to, just in the order I see them on my screen, ask Austin to go ahead and introduce himself first. We'll give him the spotlight here so he shows up in our recording, and we'll go around the horn from there.
Hi, thanks, Taylor. Yeah, my name is Austin Sills. I'm currently a biostatistician slash data scientist at Atrium Health, Wake Forest Baptist in Winston-Salem. My data science journey kind of started I guess, right out the end of high school when I started learning how to code, specifically in Python. As I went to college, the major in information sciences, and through those 4 years, I got to do a lot of coursework that revolved around data science, computer science, and business. Specifically in my junior year, or the summer after my junior year, I had the opportunity to do a research experience at North Carolina A&T, actually in Greensboro, and that was a data science research experience. And during that time, I got to do work around or research around exploring terrorist attack data collected over the decades. And that really sparked my genuine interest in data scientists and data science in general. And so going into my senior year of my undergrad journey, I had the opportunity to visit the Institute for Advanced Analytics, the IAA. That was, I think, around January. And I got to visit there, and I really liked what they had to offer, and I applied there, and kind of the rest is history from there. During that 1 year at the IAA, I had the opportunity to work on a very interesting practicum project with Fifth Third Bank. So a lot of finance, even though I wasn't really that interested in finance at the time, but I still got a valuable experience from that. But going forward to healthcare and HR, I had the opportunity to work on COVID-related research coming out of the IAA, and I was actually the one tapped to replace Diego, who since moved on from Atrium, and work on COVID-related research for about 2 years, doing all sorts of things related to researching seroprevalence in North Carolina population, and then also working on metabolomics and proteomics data to a great extent in that COVID research. And then on that, from that in the last year or so, I've moved on to work on more targeted problems related to metabolomics and proteomics and cardiology, and how those things relate to things such as heart disease and the like. So that's where I spend most of my time. I work a lot in software such as Python, R, SAS, and even a little bit of Power BI, Tableau, and things like that. That's just a little about me. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Austin. It sounds like a wide breadth of computing tools at play there. So there's not just a silver bullet where you can just use one thing to solve any particular problem. So that's curious to hear about. It's awesome. Hopefully we'll hear a little more about that. Let's go on to Sophia next.
Sure, thanks. So my name is Sophia Bessius, and I am now working at Duke AI Health as an evaluation lead for our kind of algorithmic governance program at Duke for the hospital system. So for me, my kind of pathway to data science and healthcare started with the healthcare part. I studied basically public health as an undergraduate in Philadelphia. And after that, I became a medical case manager. So I worked in direct patient services, working with people living with HIV. And I did a lot of different things in kind of the community health space up there, and eventually decided to go back for my master's degree in public health. And I did a program that took me to Europe, actually. So I was in Spain and in Copenhagen, and I had an opportunity there to work with some of the registry data in Denmark, and I did a research study on ADHD medications in that population. And that really introduced me to kind of R and coding and the epi side of public health. And I sort of fell in love with that and became more interested in moving towards data science through that experience. And so I kept going in that direction. And that's what eventually led me to go back to the IAA for the master's degree there, and And from there, I became a data scientist for UNC Health, where I did a lot of work on sepsis modeling. So looking at whether we could predict which patients were at risk for sepsis and do early intervention on them. Sepsis is one of the leading causes of mortality in hospitals. So it's a really big priority for most hospital systems, and it's a tricky thing to define even and then predict. And so there's a lot of interest in trying to do analytics to support better sepsis care. So I really hyper focused on that for a couple of years. And I worked with a team to create a predictive model that is still used at UNC Health for bringing patients to the attention of their providers who may be coming close to meeting criteria for sepsis. So that's something that that took me kind of deeper into coding and programming and all of the exciting data science modeling work. And now in my current job, I'm working with project teams who are doing those things, and I'm involved more in kind of thinking about governance of algorithms and how we can ensure that the algorithms that we're using in healthcare are serving patients' interests, and particularly are contributing to kind of fair and equitable outcomes. So we look a lot at the different forms of algorithmic bias and how we can anticipate and address that before it translates into poor outcomes for some of our patients. So that's kind of where I am today, and I appreciate being on this panel. I'm curious to hear, I guess, next from Diego.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Sophia, for the introduction. Sounds like a slightly different route than Austin, like coming backwards. So Austin started with the programming and then got into the analytics, and you were there from like a policy perspective. And then in order to really realize that goal, you had to learn some programming to get those accomplished. So it's kind of interesting, almost completely different ends of the spectrum that got you to the same spot. Really cool. All right, Diego, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Taylor. My journey was, I guess, maybe combination of Sophia's and Austin's. I was a biology and chemistry major at Carolina, and for the longest time in high school and college, I wanted to be some sort of scientist, whether that be a medical doctor or an epidemiologist or a geneticist. From an early age, I wanted to be surrounded by healthcare. I wanted to work to either make the space more accessible, since my brother had autism and I wanted to cure his autism. That's something that's always kind of driven me forward, is the idea that I could make the world a little bit better for someone like my brother or families like my brother's. But then my senior year of college, I started getting really into, actually right when I started college, the movie Moneyball came out. And I loved hearing about sabermetrics or sports analytics. So that the slide earlier in the presentation really caught my eye. And I was a huge basketball fan. I went to school at Carolina, but I was more an NBA fan. And I had a radio show at the time where I was talking about basketball. And I started to do a little more research and pulling data from the web to really be able to share something a little more nuanced, maybe more novel, and make my podcast or my radio show a little bit more about sports analytics, NBA analytics. And that introduced me to the Institute, where the three of us went. And there, going into the Institute, after college, I really wanted to stay in health analytics. Although I was casting a pretty wide net, I wanted to see what else was available. Then I joined Atrium, at the time Wake Forest, where I was working on some projects very similar to Austin, mostly in cardiovascular research. Pretty jealous that you're still doing that. Some pretty cool work you're talking about. Since then, I went to GSK, which is a pharmaceutical company in the Triangle, where I was an access strategy analytics manager, so trying to better the access to medication. So although I left the public healthcare space and moved to private healthcare, I felt like I was still doing something to promote public health. by making medications more affordable and accessible, especially in the specialty pharmacy market. And from there, I joined a tech startup called Databricks. We're still a startup because we haven't gone public yet, but it's a massive company with 5,000 employees. And now I'm on the more of the tech consulting side. So I've moved from data science to a role where I help organizations such as Wake Forest or Atrium and Duke figure out how best to manage their algorithms, how best to create their data architecture, and how to make the most out of their health data. I work specifically with health and life science customers. So that's been my role now for 4 months. So I'll tell you more about it once I get a little more up to pace, but it's been awesome.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for sharing that, Diego. I think my experience with my friends who are in healthcare, a lot of people get started in healthcare because they know somebody who's been personally impacted and they want to make a difference. So I think your story is a common one in that way, but your route certainly uncommon to get there. Also, I loved hearing you call it a radio show because we don't, what's that now, right? Everyone just knows about a podcast, but some of us that are older than our high school students remember Bennett used to be a radio show. So that was great for me. That's awesome. And then the other thing that caught me is, when you said you were at a startup, I was like, oh no, did I get his bio wrong? I thought he was at Databricks. And I kind of, because I think about Databricks being a massive company, but I think they've just had a big impact very quickly and have scaled quite a bit. So that's awesome. And it's great to hear that it seems like you're almost like a force multiplying effect for your impact by being able to empower so many other people through the work that you're doing there. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So,
I just to add to that, I have a hard time calling Databricks a startup because they've had a huge impact very quickly, like you said, and it's just so privately held. So it's for folks that are interested in one day entering the startup world, that pace of tech or a tech startup is pretty unique. So that flavor still really exists at Databricks. Everyone's encouraged to tear things apart, start over, be disruptive, and be really fast paced. So maybe startup isn't the right word. I have to think of the right word to use there, but yeah.
I think that segues to a question that I have as I was listening to the differences between everybody's past and where they are and what they're doing. I think, and I apologize to the panelists. I gave them some questions ahead of time, but this one just came to me. So they will have not heard this one before. But I think healthcare oftentimes kind of gets a rep as being almost like a decade behind when it comes to kind of the technology. And it's not like a startup company where, let's tear it down and do it again tomorrow, because I think when people's lives are at stake, it's a slightly different risk tolerance. And I'm wondering, what is it like to be somebody who goes through a cutting edge analytics program and then thrown into a space where a lot of times it has to move very slowly? How did that resonate? Did it surprise you? What were some challenges, or maybe what is it with the advantages of that? Just throw that out there to anybody who wants to jump in.
I can take that. Let's start with that. I joining Wake Forest coming out of the Institute had a lot of similarities. There were a lot of similarities because Wake Forest was still academia. So what I faced there was similar academic folks and culture that I had seen prior at the Institute and before that in college. The pace, however, was an adjustment. There's as you said, a ton of silos within healthcare, especially like the hospital system. Research is very siloed, sometimes from the other groups across the hospital system that's also wanting to benefit from whatever initiative they're working on. So there's a lot of, red tape you have to cross, a lot of politics around the organization to get access to data because you're working with sensitive data. So that was an adjustment for me, where I was more used to getting access to data right away and being able to play with the data and do what I want. But the benefits there were that I made a ton of relationships. I had really great mentors while I was there in epidemiology and medicine that really helped me shape my trajectory and what I value in at a workplace.
Yeah,
Thanks, Diego. Austin, Sophia, anything to add to that?
yeah, I guess I can add something. And I also say I think the interesting thing about healthcare is the data itself. I think it's vast in nature, but sometimes it's hard to access easily. Whether that be uh, pulling from EHR data or trying to get data that's managed by another institution. For example, recently in the past couple of weeks, we've been contemplating accessing this data from something called the UK Biobank, which is a big repository for MMR data out of the UK. But one caveat to that is that you basically have to apply for this data, and you have to go through a bunch of red tape, like Diego mentioned, just to get access to that data, and that might take a month. You don't know, just depending on how things are at the moment. And so I think that's one thing that can be a challenge in the healthcare field is just getting direct access to the data that you want to analyze. And then I think the other thing is maybe sometimes data is not as pretty as in other fields, but a lot of times it can be kind of dirty, especially if you're looking at EHR data. Sometimes things are, entered manually compared to like finance, where things are probably a little more automated as far as data collection is concerned. So everything is kind of ready to go. And so the speed of discovery is a little bit more accelerated compared to like a healthcare field.
Yeah. And I'll add to that, it's interesting because I always hear that about like healthcare being a decade behind. And in some sense, I agree. I mean, I think often the methods, depending on the area of healthcare, I think certainly in hospital care and in public health, sometimes the methods that you are using day to day aren't kind of the sexy new AI machine learning stuff that people tend to get excited about. However, I think the questions in healthcare are really interesting. And sometimes I think part of data science is matching the method to the situation, both to the question and to the need. And in healthcare, there's maybe a particular emphasis on explainability and transparency that sometimes can be method limiting, not always, but as sometimes that's always a discussion that I would say is happening. But the questions you get to think about and the data science you get to do are pretty cool in healthcare. And sometimes it's not even always about predicting something. All right, it's my kid's bedtime. There we go. So, couple interruptions. BBC moment. The questions that you get to think about aren't always just about kind of traditional predictive modeling, but also are often about modeling a process or something like, in the case of sepsis, defining in this really complex electronic health record data when sepsis is actually starting to occur based on what we can observe and what we can't observe. And so there are lots of applications also for data science that are really super interesting and may rely on different kinds of methods, including unsupervised learning, sometimes. So I think there's a lot of richness there. And so while I do agree that healthcare is behind in some ways, I think in other ways, it's got a lot of substance that makes it worthwhile. And sometimes there's just less hype and there's less tolerance for hype. So that part can be good.
That's well said.
Awesome. Thank you. A couple of y'all have touched on something about working with just data, period. And it's a theme that we've heard from a lot of panelists in a lot of different industries, is that getting access to the data that you want is often difficult. And once you've got it, it's not always or almost never in a state where you can just immediately jump in and use it. And I'm wondering, it sounds like that's the case in medical as well. And I'm wondering, are there any sort of kind of like challenges that come along with specifically medical data? We had one question come in asking about kind of anonymizing data because of HIPAA requirements. And how might some sort of like industry standard help with that for you all in healthcare? I know in my kind of initial planning for this panel, I ran something called FHIR, or the FHIR, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources Specification, which I think is trying to solve this issue where everybody's data looks different. So I'm just wondering if y'all have any thoughts on that or can share some insight as to unique challenges of messy data in the world of healthcare.
Yeah, I can give you an example of a unique, messy data situation. So I mentioned in my introduction that I was brought to Wake Forest to work on the COVID research project. And so that included basically a vast amounts of data collection across time. And so how that worked was the participants would sign up to participate in the study, and then they'll get this app that Oracle developed where they would answer daily surveys about symptoms they experienced, whether they had a positive PCR test, whether they had any serology tests and things like that. And so the aim of the study was to basically to collect this data over time in a uniform fashion. But I think as we discovered as time went on, the uniform way in which we want to collect the data started to get a little spread out. So we, like, ideally in our serology test, for example, we would like a participant to do their test once every 30 days, right? But as time goes on, now they're doing once every 60 days or one every 90 days. So maybe you want to answer now, okay, how can we measure seroprevalence in the North Carolina, triad area at a specific point in time? It becomes more difficult when you have people who are testing in wide swaths of time, and so formulating ways to adjust for things like that provides a unique challenge. Plus, you just have a lot of missing data. So you might have a person who answers a particular question about a certain symptom they had on a certain day, but then the next day they don't want to answer their survey at all. So do we assume they still have the symptoms that next day? Things like that. So it's a unique problem that was interesting to work on. But yeah.
Yeah, humans, we're just really bad at doing what other humans want us to do consistently. It sounds like that's an underlying issue there. Yeah, like you mentioned earlier, it's not like stock market data where the market is what it is, and as long as you're paying attention, you can record it perfectly. A human might not fill out the survey the way you want it or when you want it or any of that. Yeah, that's a great insight. Any other thoughts from you, Sophia or Diego?
Yes, I'll say that's such an interesting example, Austin. And I think it brings to mind something that I would say is a very big challenge in healthcare data overall, which is there's so much missing data, and the missingness is informative. And it reflects all kinds of things about our patterns of care seeking and the conditions under which we seek care, the kind of distribution of resources that support seeking healthcare in the first place, insurance, all of these social determinants, et cetera. And so we really can't ever assume that the absence of some data point indicates the absence of like the problem that we are exploring. And so figuring out ways of handling that is a big part of my work anyway. And also, I think always just a key part of design of healthcare analytics solutions, we need to understand kind of what the data we have are reflecting about the world as it is. And so I think that's just something that is interesting. And to elaborate a little bit on the COVID stuff, I mean, that's a great example, because think about how much over the course of the pandemic our testing data has changed. Like, first, testing was a really scarce resource. It was only PCR. Very few people could be tested. Someone being tested almost certainly indicated that they had COVID in the early days. Then more people started to seek testing. Community sites popped up. There was a lot of PCR testing. And then all of a sudden, but people generally had to go somewhere in person to do it. And then we got rapid tests and people stopped doing PCR testing as much. And at first, it was a very particular group of people who could access regular rapid testing. And then that shifted a little bit. And now we don't even look at testing data anymore for COVID modeling. We look at wastewater data. So, over the course of a short period in a rapidly evolving pandemic situation, the data sources and the meaning of the data we were collecting dramatically shifted. So I think that kind of scenario happens in slower ways in other areas of health and healthcare. And it's just one of the things that we are challenged by in interpretation and kind of always figuring out what is the best path forward with what we have, and how can we responsibly interpret what we have.
Awesome.
If I can just mention one more thing,
Please.
sorry. You mentioned, Sophia, the changing nature of the pandemic. And so I remember distinctly one really hard problem to untangle was that we're trying to measure the prevalence of natural infection after vaccines came out. And we still have missing data on people who might not report if they got vaccinated or not. And so you just made me think about that. So that's just another thing I want to bring up.
Totally. Yeah, that's gotten so challenging.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll shift towards our audience questions. And I mentioned at the top of the meeting here, we've got some students who are joining us live from class this evening. And they are in their, I think, third week of our first foundational course in data science. And I'm wondering, what skills might you tell them are essential for a data scientist to have, specifically in the healthcare industry? And then how do you all stay up to date with the latest advances in the field? So like, what do you need to know when you get started? And then what do you keep learning about as you keep going?
I could start us off there. And to my credit, I've resisted bringing up Databricks a couple of times on this call because I think Databricks does an awesome job with some of the management and the unruliness of healthcare data. Specifically, from my perspective, being new to Databricks, we are the data and AI company. Like that's our goal is to make data democratized across industries. So it's fairly easy for me to keep up with the latest in data science, data engineering, data architecture, because we are either creating it or very involved in the open source community, or we have emails where our CEO is asking us our opinion on something that's just come out. That wasn't always the case when I was at GSK and Wake Forest. That is a skill that I think every good data scientist will develop. Maybe not right away, but it's one of those tangible skills that really sharpen with practice and can become stale. So it's really great to stay on top of this. It's just investing as much of your time into your own education, whether that be in the office with personal development funds, through social groups like employee resource groups, ERGs. I'm a member of a neurodiversity ERG where we talk a lot about autism in the workplace and disabilities in the workplace. That helps keep me sharp as to why I'm working in healthcare in the first place or continuing to work in healthcare. And just continuously surfing the web. YouTube is amazing. I wish I had it when I was in high school. You could find a ton of stuff on there on data engineering, data science, and keeping up with podcasts is really helpful as well.
Awesome. Austin or Sophia, anything to add to that for skills to get started and how to maintain them?
Yeah, I would say for me, I think if I were to go back and I guess, tell my past self, learn these things if you want to go into data science. First would be just to get a solid foundation as far as being able to code. I think that can actually be a barrier to some people who actually are interested in data science. I remember actually at the IAA, became good friends with another student who really struggled with coding. He had never coded before, really headed into the program. And so, especially for like the first few months there, he really kind of struggled, and he relied on me kind of to help him through some tough things. And so I think if you have a solid foundation, coding wise, it can allow you to kind of focus more on the theoretical sides of data science, statistics, so on and so forth. And also, I think another good skill to start cultivating is just the inquisitive mind and creative problem solving mind. I think that's essential, whatever industry you're in. That will go a long way. Right.
Awesome. Sophia, anything else? I know it looks like it's still maybe bedtime there. So if you need to take a if you need to take a minute, that's okay.
I'm having my hair sprayed currently.
Excellent.
But I will say one thing, I just want to validate the folks who have already talked about interviewing and like reaching out to people and just maintaining those connections. It's so awesome. I did a little bit of interviewing when I was at the IAA for our little blog, and I met a few folks that way. It was great, and I've sort of followed their careers over time. And I think just sort of keeping an eye on both the ideas that interest you and then the people that interest you is helpful. And for me, I like Twitter. I don't know if I'm still going to be on there because it's getting a little weird, but I have found that to be a really great way to tap into like a specific interest area in data science and kind of curate a group of people whose ideas I'm interested in, and even build some connections with them. So all of those ways, whether it's interviewing or like getting involved in different social media spaces or like real IRL communities, all of those things help. And just not being afraid to reach out to folks, I think is great. It can seem intimidating, but there are a lot of people who are just ready to be approached and talk through stuff. And if you ask, you'll get pretty far.
Awesome. It seems like one theme I'm hearing from all of y'all is it's a lifelong learning experience. You're not going to learn everything in one class or even one degree. That the field is changing, and you can keep learning through courses or YouTube or networking, but you have to kind of stay plugged in. It's not a one and done. I think that's good advice, regardless of whether you go into data science or not. But anything technical is always changing. So getting yourself plugged into a community is really important. All right, we're going to go to some of our audience questions here that have been coming in. I think we've covered some of these, but this one comes from Brian Stutzman. How difficult is it to combine data from different healthcare agencies or hospital systems? And has it become easier with such companies like Epic Healthcare Systems becoming so prevalent? I know all of the doctors I go to are on Epic Healthcare System. So does that force their own standards and make data cleaner to access? So
I can.
How difficult is it to combine?
It unfortunately what I've seen from, and this is changing, from public health and private healthcare, there isn't a ton of sharing of data.
Mm-hmm.
However, I'm going to preach Databricks again. There's a new way that organizations with millions of rows of data or billions and huge, we're talking about massive data sets, can share anonymized data. And companies such as Databricks or a couple of other ones are facilitating this transaction to accelerate the pace at which we're bettering public health. That's actually one of the major reasons why I decided to join Databricks, is this whole democratization of data and AI, and for the better. We saw a lot of organizations in private pharma working together for the first time to try to beat COVID. So it's not it's not unheard of, but I wish I saw it more.
Yeah, I will say that going back to the COVID research, this was a multi-site study that I was working on for 2 years. So it was like over 11 different sites involved. And so about year 2 of the study, they started trying to bring EHR data from the different sites together, which was a very, 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 very big undertaking, just because it was a data harmonization factor that was very hard to untangle. Something that we're still working on kind of post-study. And so I would say that, yeah, it's probably not common, but it can be done. So I think that's changing though slowly. So
Yeah, I like that too. Data harmonization.
Yeah,
That's
I've not
definitely a
heard
big
that one
thing.
before. I like that. That's good.
Feeling that.
We've got a question here specifically for you, Sophia, wondering how do you control for bias in the predictive models that you create, in particular bias against protected classes?
Cool. Yeah, good question. So a lot of times, and this is something that I'm thinking about a lot right now because we're working on creating kind of governance for this, and how do we think about bias? How do we not just prevent it at the modeling stage, but well before the modeling stage when we're figuring out which problems to address and how our analytics solution will address them. So what we're working on at Duke anyway is really a framework for thinking about a bias analysis that extends from like the ideation phase all the way through to implementation and maintenance. And so there are different forms of bias that can appear at different parts of that process. So early on, we need to think about that thing of even informatively missing data, right? And like, what does it mean that we have this data? What does it reflect about the world as it is? And what kind of systemic biases might we be reinforcing or even amplifying through a modeling exercise, for example? So part of it is just anticipating that and starting with those questions and sort of working through an analysis framework. And then later you get into stuff like, okay, we've decided that this is a problem worth pursuing. We think we can kind of mitigate some of the biases in our data through sampling or whatever else. And we need to make sure that we have representativeness in our training population. Then we need to look at how our model is performing across subgroups. So those protected classes that you mentioned, we want to look at particularly at those groups and decide which are the groups that are really relevant for this question. And we really want to make sure that our model is performing at some level of parity for. And so then in the evaluation phase, you want to break that down and look at it. And then in the maintenance phase, you want to make sure that that's holding up, and you want to make sure that also the human interaction with the tool that we've created is not introducing new biases that we're unaware of. So how does an end user interpret the score for different patients, for example, is something we have to consider. So there's so many ways that we need to think about bias, and it's not just limited to the data set that we start with or even the models that we generate, but also the questions that we're answering and the ways that we're using the tools ultimately. So it's kind of like a whole process. And I think one of the things that we see a lot is in the field, like there's a lot of energy around like parity and in performance and subgroup analysis. And those things are really critical, but they're not the whole picture. So I don't know, just thinking about how to integrate all of that is something that I'm actively engaged in at work. So thanks for that question. It's a big topic, and I don't have concrete answers, but we can at least come up with the buckets that we need to attend to. Yeah.
I really appreciate that holistic view. I think a lot of times the focus is on algorithms, which of course is an important focus to have. But I think realizing that's only one piece of the problem is really important. Algorithms are really good at what they do, but as you mentioned, like if the data is not right or you're not sampling correctly, the algorithm is only going to amplify or make it worse in some cases. So yeah, the whole big picture solution to that bias problem is important to have. And as you mentioned, a very complicated one. So not going to be an easy fix, but certainly important to have on front of mind. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for this evening. We're already at 7:45. I'm consistently amazed at how quickly these panels go because we get engrossed in the conversation. And I always say, like, this is an outreach to our students, but I also view it as an equal parts professional development for myself. I learned so much from you all, and I love doing these panels, and I hope our students have enjoyed attending, and our faculty who took time out of their evening as well. I want to give one last big thank you to Austin, Diego, and Sophia for taking time out of their evenings and sharing their experiences with us. And we hope that maybe we'll see you again. If anybody wants to come to campus and meet some of our students, happy to meet you and give you a tour. Otherwise, best of luck to you and everything that you're working on. And I hope you all get wonderful data sets to work with and you don't have to be wrangling with them forever. Thank you, everybody.
So much. Thanks for organizing, Taylor.
All right.
Good luck to everybody.
Fun.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.